Welcome to Azure questions and answers video series, and let's start with the first question. What is Azure? Now before we move ahead and we talk about Azure, let's first try to understand what problem does Azure solve. Because if we are able to understand what problem Azure solves, the rest things are much easier. So let's consider an example of a small startup online company who wants to go online and do an e-commerce business. So they want to basically sell their products online. Now in order to go online, they need to do the following things. The first thing is they need to buy upfront hardware. So in other words, they need to buy a server with some X GB amount of RAM, with hard disk, with dual processor, Xeon processor, whatever it is. They need to probably buy some routers, load balancers, not sure. So upfront they need to pay for the hardware. Second, they also need to pay for operating system cost, SQL Server database in case they are using it. So they need to pay for certain software license cost. And in order to go online, they need to go to some hosting provider and say that we want to host our servers in your data center. So they need to also pay for the data center cost. And finally, adding up, they also need to pay monthly amount of salary to IT persons who are basically going to do backups, who are going to do maintenance of their servers. So the four important sections where this company needs to do investment is needs to buy hardware, needs to buy licensed software, needs to take both of these things, the hardware, the software and his application, to an online data center. So probably they need to pay some monthly charges to the data center for X amount of bandwidth and etc. And finally they need to pay the IT personal salary. Now let's take up two conditions for this company. Let's say that this company does very good, excellent. You know, they estimated X amount of users, now it is 10 times more than that. And now the company starts realizing that the amount of load they had estimated when they started hosting this application is much more than that. Now they are not able to scale with their current infrastructure and with their current data center. So what they do? They go and hire probably IT professionals who are very good in understanding scalability. They go and buy more hardware. They probably add more software licenses to it. They go to the data center and buy more bandwidth. So in other words, to scale to the business requirement, they go and add more money. They go and add more finance. Now the finance is one part. The second part is that this will not happen in a day. So in other words, if they say that, okay, I want to scale today itself, that will not happen, probably because you need time for procuring the hardware, you will need time to hire the IT professionals. It can take months. So if you do good, the problem is of scalability. The second, now let's take up the second scenario. Let's say that you do bad. Let's say that this company doesn't work nice. The innovative idea what they thought about will bring money to them did not work well. So they end up with the loss of the upfront hardware cost, with the loss of the software license cost, and the yearly amount which they already paid to the data center. So they end up with a huge amount of loss because they have bought all the things and now they do not know what to do with this hardware. And on the top of it, they have already hired the IT professionals. So the second part of the problem is upfront cost. So if they do well, the problem is scalability. If they do bad, the problem is the upfront cost. So what is the solution for this? The solution to this problem is pay per use. So in other words, if this IT company, if some hosting provider would have approached this IT company who says, hey look, you do not need to buy the hardware upfront, you do not need to buy the software licenses, you do not need to hire IT professionals, all these things I can take care of. So in other words, I have a model here where you can get a shared hardware, a shared software licenses, shared IT personals who can look after your backups, who can look after your day-to-day problems of the server. And what you do is that you just pay me as much as you use. So for example, if you tell me, okay, this month I'm going to consume 100 GB bandwidth, I'm going to consume, I will need 80 GB of hard disk, and I will need probably 40% of your CPU usage, 40% of your CPU server time. We will give you that much. So in other words, the company doesn't have to invest on the hardware upfront. They don't have to buy the software licenses. So in case if they have issues with the business, whatever they have paid monthly rental, that's the cost. And yes, the development of the application is also one of the cost. And in case they do good and they say that, okay, I want to scale now for more RAM, for more memory, for more bandwidth, they can just approach this provider and say, can you increase the bandwidth from 100 GB to 200 GB? And he will say yes, this is what it is, and this is the monthly incremental cost. So in other words, the answer is pay per use. And the fundamental is pretty simple. I mean to say, let's say that you can either take up a car and you can pay a huge amount, or you can either go into a nice luxury bus and share the cost with other people. So the pay per use fundamental will work with the sharing model. So in other words, on the same server, the same hardware is shared between lot of companies. So in other words, this whole shared environment is shared between application company A, company B, company C, and each one of them just pays for whatever they use. Now that we have understood, yes, the pay per use is the answer. Now let's try to understand what are the different things we will consume, or what are the different aspects for which we need to pay. Primarily, you pay for three different kind of resources when you actually host your server online. So in other words, the first resource which you pay for is the network, that is bandwidth. So how much bandwidth do you consume? So if you're consuming 100 GB bandwidth, so accordingly you need to pay to your online hosting provider. The second kind of resource which we utilize is the CPU processor. So is your site logic intensive? Are you having a worker process, or are you having some kind of a Windows process which is running on the server and it is utilizing the CPU processor? So how much percentage of CPU do you want, or how much is your CPU utilization? And the third one is storage. How much hard disk capacity do you want? How much storage are you going to utilize? So all these three amounts to your total cost of your online server. So if some hosting provider can provide me all this thing as pay per use, that would really bring down my cost. So for example, if somebody can say, okay, tell me how much bandwidth you want this month, next month, how much CPU processor are you going to use this month, next month, and depending on that you have to pay. So that really brings down my cost. So the next question which would pop up in your mind is there something out there to achieve this? Yes, there is something called as cloud computing. And by using cloud computing, we can enable the pay per use model, and there are many hosting providers who can provide you the cloud computing service. So let's start off with defining cloud computing. Once we have done the definition of cloud computing, then we can easily map Azure with cloud computing. Cloud computing is a platform which enables application to be hosted on internet, and depending on how much resources your application needs, it can provide on a pay per use basis the necessary resources. That means the necessary RAM, the necessary CPU power, the necessary bandwidth, etc. Now so in other words, cloud computing is like a platform. Now let's look into the architecture of cloud computing. So the one-liner definition of cloud computing is that it provides infrastructure by which it will provide a virtual environment for every application, and depending on the demand of the application, it will provide the necessary CPU usage, the necessary CPU power, the necessary bandwidth, and the necessary hard disk space. Now here's a simple diagram which I have, and which shows the necessary components which are involved in cloud computing. Once you know the general architecture of cloud computing, you can easily map it with Azure, because Azure is nothing but it's a cloud computing platform. So I'll come to that definition later on. So let's just try to concentrate on what are the different components involved in cloud computing.